The television. How often do you stop to think about this electronic device? It provides a good source of entertainment, especially if it's equipped with streaming services. It can tell you the latest state of the world from various news channels, and can lend its screen to gaming systems. A remarkable device that is present in the majority of people's homes, probably in your home. This isn't something to fear, but consider the following. It's sometime past midnight and you've gone to sleep. Perhaps you've experienced a wonderful dream, or maybe you've just escaped a terrifying nightmare. Whatever the case, you find yourself waking up. When you open your eyes, you notice an electronic glow coming from your living room. Curious, you make your way toward it and discover your television is on. Strange, because you had turned it off before going to sleep. So, a bit concerned, you turn it off and unplug it, but the television turns back on. Worried, you run back to your room to grab your phone. However, when you grab it, you notice your phone is scrolling through websites on its own. This may sound like a made-up fiction, but for Izumi Takahashi, this is all too real. And in the days that follow, her nightmare begins to take hold of more than just a television and a phone. I'm Agent Kai, and I've decided to make my reports for L.I.O.S in the form of a podcast. My hope is that you, dear listener, will discover the truth of this world and open your eyes to it. You wouldn't guess it by looking at it, but nestled on top of the Atamachi Tower is a grand hotel called Aman Tokyo. It offers its guests panoramic views of the city and exquisite dining options. One of these options is the Cafe by Aman, which is tucked in the heart of the Atamachi forest, just a stone's throw from the hotel grounds. A lovely cafe that serves delicious pastries and sweets. Not being one for sweets myself, I came here because of their champagne. There's nothing better than having a glass of Tadenze, the best champagne in the world in my opinion, in the evening. Now, don't get it wrong, there's no way on earth I'd be able to afford to wine and dine, let alone stay at a luxury hotel such as this one. But Patrice Landless, the director of L.I.O.S, spares no expense for her agents when possible. It was here that I found myself, 3 glasses of champagne deep, waiting for Izumi Takahashi and her girlfriend Asako. As far as they knew, they were meeting world-renowned parapsychologist Santiago Nassar, who, on the favor of a friend, agreed to meet and speak with the troubled Izumi. According to Cameron, my handler, Asako had been going around all of Tokyo and the internet in search of someone who could help her troubled girlfriend. From Reddit to every psychologist's office in the city, Asako did her best to find help. The following Reddit post captures Asako's frustration. She posted it in several subreddits. The one here is from the subreddit r/haunted. Subject: Help. Is my girlfriend haunted or psychotic? Post: About a month ago, my girlfriend began experiencing strange occurrences happening to her around her apartment. At first, she was awakened by her TV in the middle of the night. The TV had turned on by itself. She then unplugged it and still it turned on. After, her cell phone began to go insane. It started scrolling through websites, mostly manga review sites with negative reviews about a certain manga she writes. I guess I should mention that my girlfriend is a mangaka, a manga artist. If you're into manga, you've probably read hers. I won't say what it is here for privacy reasons, but the weird occurrences have continued. My girlfriend has been sleeping in my place because the TV in her place keeps waking her up. Her phone blasts music sporadically. Her laptop's batteries overheat, despite the fact it's not even charging. When she came to my place, things seemed fine. We thought maybe her place was haunted or something. But after a couple of days, the weird occurrences began happening in my apartment. It's so scary. We don't know what to do. We feel like we're going mad. I won't lie. At first, I thought she was doing it on purpose. But one night, I pretended to be asleep. I watched my girlfriend sleep. I know that sounds creepy, but you have to understand, I was scared and didn't know if she was doing this or not. Turns out she wasn't. But what's even weirder is the fact that on that night when the TV, unplugged by the way, turned on, the first thing I heard blasting from it was a commercial that said my girlfriend's name. Either we've both gone psychotic or there's something wrong going on here. I have a theory that my girlfriend may be haunted. Wherever she goes, the weird occurrences start to happen, but she swears she's not. We've been to multiple psychologists and have taken advice from spiritual leaders, but nothing has worked. I'm begging here. Help us. Asako's post was met with several comments. A user said, "That sounds scary. I wish you the best of luck." Another comment, "Not sure what's going on there, but maybe try recording the weird occurrences and showing the recording to the police." One sour user said, "Maybe your girlfriend is psychotic. She probably just needs a good shagging." And finally, the comment that took the cake, "Tell your girlfriend to put on some porn. That way, when the ghost turns on the TV, you and your girlfriend can have a hot, haunting, humping session." But, as luck would have it, one of L.I.O.S' intelligencers came across her post. The conversation, which took place over the course of several days, went as follows. No longer human. "Hi, your post sounds a lot like what happened to a friend of mine. No one would take him seriously either. He said that something weird was happening around him. Everyone called him crazy and dramatic. Now, I'm not sure how he was able to get rid of that something weird. He never told me, and I didn't want to ask. But what he did was speak to Santiago Nassar, a world-renowned parapsychologist. He helped a lot. Maybe he can help your girlfriend too. Don't take my word for it though. Look him up. Let me know if you need any help." Jijikat Nezuko. "Hello. Thank you so much for your post. I'm glad to see that there's still some good people out there. I will look him up. I'll let you know if we need your help. Again, thank you." A few days later, via private message, Jijikat Nezuko. "Hello again. We did some research on Santiago Nassar and have to say that we're impressed. He seems legit. We even ordered his book, The Haunted Self, Case Studies in the Paranormal. How is it possible that we missed him before? We want to reach out to him, but we're afraid he, or rather his agent, may not get back to us soon enough. The weird occurrences are constant, and now my girlfriend has noticed that when she's standing in a crowd of people, the people's devices begin acting up. You said you could help. Is there any way you really can?" No longer human. "Hi, I'm glad you did some research and saw for yourself. And yes, I can help. My friend has stayed in touch with Nassar. I've told him about your dilemma, and he said he can talk to him and see if he can set up a meeting." Jijikat Nezuko. "Yes, please. That would be great. Thank you." And so the meeting was set. While I sipped my champagne, Izumi and Asako arrived. They look exhausted, especially Izumi. The bags under her eyes were a grave contrast to her otherwise fine features. She must have known this because she wore her hair in a way that partially covered her face. I stood up when they reached the table. "Konnichiwa," Izumi said. "Konnichiwa," I responded. We all took our seats and exchanged formalities. Izumi and Asako were delighted to meet in Amon, Tokyo, they told me, because they'd always wanted to experience this place but felt like they couldn't afford it. I told them to order anything they'd like, that it was on me. Once we got all that out of the way, Izumi began to question me about the book I'd written on the paranormal. The book in question was The Haunted Self, Case Studies in the Paranormal. I would be remiss, dear listener, if I didn't come clean here. I did not write this book. Santiago Nassar did. Or rather, one of L.I.O.S' ghostwriters. The book could be found on Amazon. Anyone could technically order this book. However, if someone did try to purchase it, they would receive the message, "We're sorry, the book you are trying to purchase is currently out of stock." Only Izumi Takahashi or Asako Yamazaki could actually get their hands on this book. So, when Izumi found the book and ordered it, her IP address was picked up by L.I.O.S, and her order request was rerouted to headquarters, where the book was then shipped out to her. Of course, once this was done, the book's existence was wiped out from the internet for good. Don't ask me how this works, I have no idea. That's the job of Percy Blade, L.I.O.S' technology expert. My job with the book was to read all 250 pages of it and know it by heart, which I did on my way to Tokyo. Izumi referred to a specific section in the book titled Yurei, which spoke about hauntings, or more specifically, the haunting of people. Yurei is a Japanese word that roughly translates to ghost. Izumi explained that she believed someone, a critic perhaps, had set a yurei on her. There's a long history behind the yurei, dear listener, that you should be aware of. On average, yurei is associated with a person who has died. But ghosts in Japanese tradition and culture can be divided up into two categories. The first is the traditional view of a person who has died with unfinished business or some kind of powerful resentment. They stick around the world of the living in order to quench this emotion. Truth be told, you've probably crossed paths with a yurei and didn't even know it. That's because yurei look and act like a regular person. Only those who knew them would recognize them as ghosts. The second kind is the yurei that appears more ghostly. This is the kind that, if you should have the unfortunate luck of crossing its path, you notice it was a ghost. You know because this kind of yurei does not have any feet. They seem to hover over the ground. When Izumi told me she believes someone had set a yurei on her, it disturbed me. Yurei, to my knowledge, were not usually controlled by others. I explained this to Izumi. She agreed but insisted that it was possible. Therefore, I asked her to tell me how she came to this conclusion. When she was a teenager growing up in Tokyo, she would always spend time wandering the streets, observing people and browsing different manga shops. She would do this alone. She wasn't in the business of making friends, she said. It was during one of these wanderings that Izumi found herself waiting for the metro. She was reading the latest weekly Shonen Jump when she laid eyes on the most beautiful woman she'd ever seen. Long black hair tied in a ponytail, flawless skin, and stunning legs. She was standing by the rail swinging her briefcase back and forth. Izumi did her best to look away and focus on her manga, but she couldn't help herself. She felt like she needed to speak to her. In fact, Izumi admitted, she fantasized about going up to the woman and kissing her. She wanted to feel her body press against hers. And it seemed like the woman had somehow sensed Izumi's intentions because at that moment, the woman started in her direction. When Izumi realized this, she returned her attention to her manga. Of course, she couldn't focus on anything other than the woman. She felt her heart beating faster as the woman approached her. "Excuse me," the woman said. Izumi looked up. The woman was wearing a large surgical mask. Yes? Do you think I'm pretty? The woman's voice was angelic, enchanting. Izumi nodded and said, "Yes, I think you're very pretty." The woman giggled. She then removed her surgical mask. "Even like this?" Izumi dropped her magazine and stared at the woman wide-eyed. The woman's mouth was slit at the corners all the way up to her ears. She then began to open her mouth, releasing a grating sound. Izumi threw some yen and a couple of hard candies onto the floor and bolted out of the metro and back onto the city street without glancing back. From that night forward, Izumi gave up her daily wanderings throughout the city for fear of bumping into that woman. Despite that terrifying encounter shaking up her world, making her aware that there were things in the world that defied logic, it was the best thing that happened to her. It's what gave her the idea for her now popular manga Onmyoji Seimai, which she worked on non-stop. But another side effect from that night was that it put her in touch with the other side, as she called it. Ever since then, she could see things others were oblivious to, and it was this feeling, she said, that told her she was being haunted. She had always done her best not to anger the spirits of the dead. Therefore, Izumi concluded that the yurei that was now making her life impossible was deliberately cast on her. When Izumi finished her tale, I said, "Did you ever see the Kuchisake Onna again?" She shook her head. "No, and I don't ever want to." The Kuchisake Onna is not an entity you'd want to run into, dear listener. She is a beautiful woman who wears a surgical mask and carries a large pair of scissors. She'll ask you if she's pretty. If you say no, she'll kill you with her scissors. If you say yes, she'll remove her mask to reveal her slit-up mouth. If you make a face or say no, she'll kill you. Running won't help. She'll be in your path every time you turn around. But if you should have the misfortune of crossing paths with this woman, your best bet is to do what Izumi did. Throw money or hard candy at her. This will distract the Kuchisake Onna long enough for you to run. However, don't count on this working all the time. A few years before I became an agent for L.I.O.S, a former agent met their demise at the hands of this creature. The agent was found with their mouths slit from ear to ear, candy and money still in their hands. Izumi got lucky. I took a sip of champagne and said, "You mentioned a critic may be the one that cast the yurei on you. Why do you believe that?" Izumi told me this critic, who called himself Shinshi, had been attacking her work for years, always calling her writing weak and her drawing disastrous. Once he wrote, "Miss Takahashi clearly does not understand how to create a good manga. The fact she is still in print is surprising. She should do the world a favor by hanging her self-taught drawing and writing up." Shinshi's critiques on Izumi's work got more personal. Soon, the text messages and phone calls began. To understand why Shinshi disliked Izumi's work so much, dear listener, it's important to know what Izumi's manga is about. Onmyoji Semi deals with a fictionalized account of Abe no Semi, who lived from 921 to 1005. Historical records hint that Abe no Semi was a middle-ranking bureaucrat who became the highest-ranking onmyoji. An onmyoji is a divinatory and geomancy practice with roots in Chinese yin-yang and the 5 elements of philosophy. Basically, an onmyoji was a person who specialized in magic. Semi, much like Izumi's version, came to be shrouded in legend. It was said that he had control of 12 shikigami, spirit servants, that would do his bidding. They would open the doors to his house, which to other people would seem like the doors were opening themselves, because shikigami were invisible to regular people. Izumi took the tales of Abe no Semi and created a modernized version of this person. First, she made Abe no Semi a woman called Abi no Semi. Abi was a college student trained to become an onmyoji. The manga follows her trials and tribulations as she learns to control her shikigami and use them in battle against evil yokai. Ultimately, Abi will become a legendary onmyoji. The part that set off Shinshi was the fact that Izumi turned an historical male figure into a female. Ever since then, Shinshi had been criticizing Izumi. When I asked Izumi to show me the texts and phone calls, she said she couldn't because, somehow, the texts and calls vanished from her phone. She believed Shinshi was using some kind of software that erased his digital footprint. I then asked Izumi to describe what hauntings she'd been experiencing. She explained that she would be working on her manga on her computer and the screen that displayed her panels began to disappear, or something would draw grotesque creatures that winked and smiled at her. This would go on for hours, making her work more difficult than it already was and making her deadlines impossible. If it wasn't that, then it would be her television turning on at max volume. She got rid of that, but then her phone would play her music or go through all her ringtones and notification sounds. This would go on all night. Silencing the phone, even turning it off or removing the battery, did nothing. Things didn't stop there. Whenever she found herself in a crowded place like on the metro or busy city street, the electronic devices of the people near her would begin going off. All of these people's phones, people she'd never met in her life, would receive phone calls from her. Strange voice messages would be left. This happened to one of her coworkers, Toro. He sent Izumi the message and she saved it on the phone. The following is that message. "Toro, it's Izumi. I need you to call me back immediately, but don't say anything when I pick up. Just remain silent. I'll probably act like I don't know what you're doing, but just stay quiet. Call me back if I hang up, and keep doing it. If you talk, I'll fire you." The voice message was in Izumi's voice. This little stunt resulted in Izumi firing Toro because she believed him to be creepy. It wasn't until Toro sent her the voice message that things were patched up. Sort of. Toro was disturbed by Izumi's behavior and decided to seek employment elsewhere. "I haven't been able to sleep at all these past couple of months," Izumi said. "And these damn pranks are ruining my life. Is there anything you can do, Mr. Nassar?" I told Izumi that I thought it strange that a yurei would be playing tricks on her and on the people close to her. To me, it sounded like what was happening to Izumi wasn't a haunting, but rather the mischievous workings of yokai. Yokai? Do you think so? I can't be sure just yet, I said. I'll have to observe you for a couple of nights first. Since Izumi looked exhausted, I offered her my hotel room to rest. I extended the courtesy to Asako. Of course, I explained to them that I would be spending the night out in the town and the room would be free. They accepted. I advised them to leave their phones and any other electronic device in their apartment before heading up to the hotel room. Before leaving, Asako spoke to me in private. She voiced her concern that Izumi may be making things up. She explained that she wanted to believe her girlfriend more than anything, but everything Izumi had said about Shinshi and the hauntings wasn't quite true. Asako had searched for evidence of the so-called critic Shinshi without luck. She asked around as well, and no one in the publishing industry had heard of this critic. The fact that she'd never read any texts or critiques from this person worried her. She believed Izumi may have invented Shinshi in her mind, that the stress of being a mangaka may have been affecting her. As for the hauntings, Asako told me that she heard Izumi leaving that voice message on Toro's phone. She hadn't seen Izumi actually do it, but she heard her while brushing her teeth. I thanked Asako for sharing her concerns with me. While Izumi and Asako got some well-deserved rest, at least I hoped, I made my way to a few Shinto shrines throughout the city to pick up some talismans known as ofuda. Ofuda, dear listener, comes in various forms. The one I purchased was a long slip of paper with the name of a kami known as Sosono, the mythological kami or god of storms and legendary yokai slayer. These talismans are used for various purposes. One of those purposes is to exorcise malicious yurei. If that was indeed what I was dealing with here, then it would be a good idea to have something to use against it. After my purchase, I headed for Izumi's apartment. Her place was a 1LDK, which stands for one living, dining, and kitchen place, basically a one-bedroom apartment, located in Shimokitsusawa, or Shimokita, as it's known colloquially. I let myself in with Izumi's key. I snatched it from her person before leaving the hotel. Everything in her place was well organized. It was obvious Izumi hadn't stepped foot in here for some time. As I made my way around her place, I couldn't help but notice all the picture frames of her and her friends throughout various stages of life. And then there was the manga. There were stacks of them from floor to ceiling in her living room and bedroom. Her walls were filled with various issues of all kinds of manga, including her own. During my inspection of the apartment, I noticed all the electronic devices were disconnected. In fact, nothing in this place was plugged in. Even the sockets had been covered. This must have been done early on, I imagined, before Izumi realized that it didn't matter whether you had an electronic device plugged in. Once I'd given the place a thorough search, coming up with nothing, I started for the door when I heard it. The thumping of quickened footsteps coming from somewhere in the apartment. My first thought was that Izumi had followed me here, but that thought was dispelled when I began to hear the faint chuckling. It was coming from inside the walls. Then it came from underneath the floorboards. Then the ceiling. Then the walls again. As I tried to pinpoint the source of the chuckling, I heard the thumping footsteps in the television turn on, volume at full blast. I started for the door, but as I neared it, I felt something warm pressing against my side. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. It was smoking and began to burn my hand. I threw it across the room and landed on the floor and exploded. I then resumed toward the door. It wouldn't open. No matter how hard I tried to pull the door, it wouldn't budge. I couldn't even turn the doorknob. It was like there was something blocking it. I returned to the center of the living room. The television was on full blast. Izumi's vinyl record player blasted Innocent Sorrow. The chuckling was mixed into the noise with the added soundtrack of banging coming from the walls and floor. And to make matters worse, I could see the smoke coming from the television. I knew it wouldn't be long before that flat screen blew, causing the nearby curtains to catch fire. At that moment, I knew for a fact that I was dealing with yokai, specifically with Yanari and Nurikabe, and they were planning on burning me alive, which didn't make sense. I was surrounded by yokai. They had this entire apartment, probably the entire building, in their control. Since they were invisible to humans, I couldn't see where they were standing. My only option was to outwit them. I grabbed Izumi's gaming chair and placed my coat over it, and then pushed it toward the door. This along with the dimness of the apartments, provided me enough time to jump out the window. Luckily, Izumi lived on the first floor. When I got to my feet, all the noise coming from Izumi's apartment stopped. Yokai, dear listener, are everywhere. If you have ever found yourself home alone and heard a noise like the cracking of wooden stairs, the sound of floorboards creaking, pipes clanking, maybe even the heater rattling, be assured that this is not because your house is old. These sounds occur because yokai are messing around in your home. And the older your house, the more yokai can be found. They love old homes. And if you have a new one, well, it won't be long before yokai invade it. They're always on the move, always on the lookout for a new home. The yokai I'm specifically referring to here is Yonari, or house sounders. But fear not, Yonari usually tend to be harmless to humans. Therefore, what happened to me in Izumi's apartment disturbed me. I was deliberately attacked by Yonari and Urakabi. You now know about Yonari. Urakabi is a yokai that places a wall between you and your destination. The best way to understand this tricky yokai is to imagine yourself running. At one point, you will feel like you can't run anymore. You can still run, but you feel like you can't, like there's a wall preventing you from moving forward. It's all psychological here. That's Urakabi. Yokai like these enjoy messing with humans. They're not the type to kill, unless, I thought, something was controlling them. The window I had jumped out of put me in an alleyway. After I dusted myself off, I started toward the main street when something ran past me. There, appearing a few feet before me, was a silhouette of a person under the orange glow of the street lamp. The first thing I noticed was that it had feet. The Yurei said,
"Why are you interfering? She must pay."
Then, the apparition rushed toward me while unleashing a terrifying scream that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on edge. It circled me several times before floating up into the air and vanishing. Once the silence of the night resumed, and I made sure the Yurei had gone, I made my way to the rental car and started for the hotel. It was possible, I thought, that the Yurei was going to make its move on Izumi that night. Chaos reigned throughout Amon, Tokyo. The lights were flickering, strange, incoherent voices yelled through the PA system, the walls were pounding, and even everyday objects were moving around. Many of the hotel's guests were wrestling with their phones and luggage, which had come to life and turned on their owners. The night had gone from a tranquil one to the night of the Hayakiagyo. The Hayakiagyo, dear listener, means the night procession of 100 Oni. In other words, the Hayakiagyo are wild and dangerous demons that possess all objects, and tonight they were taking hold of the Amon Hotel. I ran past all the commotion, avoiding moving chairs and other possessed objects, and headed for the stairwell. When I reached my hotel suite, Izumi and Osako were fighting off an angry Keurig shooting K-cups at them. I ran into the room, avoiding the mini-fridge's rapid fire of tiny bottles, and told Izumi and Osako to follow me. Once we were out of the hotel, the chaos ebbed. I know how this must sound, dear listener. Everyday objects turning on their owners. When you stop to think about it, it's actually quite hilarious, like something out of a Ghostbusters movie. However, I can attest that hearing something like this and experiencing it are two different things. What you must understand is that these One weren't interested in playing around with the hotel's guests and staff. At first, sure, the One enjoy terrorizing humans, but their endgame is to kill the humans. Luckily, I was able to get Izumi and Osako out of there before the One grew jaded and began killing. We made our way to Osako's apartment, where we took a moment to catch our breath and have a drink. After a few minutes, I turned to Izumi and said, "Why did you lie to me?" "Nani?" "You lied to me about your encounter with the Kuchisake Onna," I said. "Tell me what really happened that night." I told you what happened." "No, you left out an important part. Stop lying, Izumi. The longer you postpone the truth, the greater the chance others will get hurt." Izumi took a large sip of her drink. Then she exhaled and said, "Wakata." The night Izumi had encountered the Kuchisake Onna happened exactly as she had said before, except she wasn't alone. That night, she was with a girl she'd been dating in secret. They had both been into manga and enjoyed checking out various manga shops together to read and recommend different mangas to each other. Then, they liked to go to a deserted part of the metro where they could make out. It was true that Izumi found the Kuchisake Onna attractive and had wanted to kiss her despite being with her girlfriend. In fact, she admitted to thinking about the mysterious woman while kissing her girlfriend. It was her she wanted to kiss at that moment, and not her girlfriend. And when the woman approached them and revealed her true identity, Izumi, afraid for her life, pushed her girlfriend into the Kuchisake Onna's arms and ran. Her girlfriend died that night, a victim of the Kuchisake Onna. That yokai slit her face from ear to ear. Normally, this would have been the end of it, but because the yokai had lost one of her victims, Izumi's girlfriend had to pay the price. Therefore, the Kuchisake Onna slit open the girl's mouth so much that her bottom cheeks hung from her jawline, exposing her teeth. That was how Asako Yamasaki died. "How'd you know I lied?" Izumi said. I told Izumi I had broken into her apartment to investigate it, and that I noticed the photographs of her and Asako as teenagers. My first thought was that these two were high school sweethearts, but I soon noticed that there weren't any recent photographs of them. There were pictures of Izumi in various places throughout Tokyo, though. At first glance, these appeared normal. However, upon closer inspection, one could see that Izumi wasn't alone in those pictures. Her body language suggested someone else was in those photos. The camera simply couldn't capture the image of that other person. Yurei don't appear on camera. "Your Yurei is Asako." Izumi shook her head. She said it wasn't true. Asako wasn't like that. Asako, who was standing next to Izumi, said nothing. Izumi explained that she and Asako had been together for years now. She knew Asako was a Yurei, but the hauntings had to be coming from another Yurei because they had started recently. "They should have started sooner," Asako said. Izumi winced. What do you mean?" Within seconds, Asako revealed her true Yurei form. A paper-pale complexion with long disheveled black hair and bright red eyes. Her clothes turned white, and purple flames appeared beside her. Hitodama. She reminded Izumi that she was dead because of her. She had suffered the ultimate betrayal. She couldn't let that go. And while she could have easily killed Izumi whenever she wanted, she preferred to make Izumi suffer as much as possible. Of course, not knowing how to do much in her Yurei form, Asako was limited to what she could do. So, she had to be patient while she grew accustomed to her new form. It wasn't until she met the yokai in the top hat and trench coat that she was granted the ability to control yokai. "A yokai wearing a top hat and trench coat," I said. Asako smiled. "He enchanted me." When I asked her to describe his face, she blanked. She didn't recall seeing a face, but rather a shadow where the face should have been. "The gentleman unknown," I said to myself. Before I could ask any follow-up questions, Asako grew restless and said it was time for Izumi to suffer the same fate she gave her. She unleashed a loud roar and started for Izumi. I ran and got in front of her. "Don't do this, Asako," I said. "If you do, you're going to doom your soul to walk on Earth for eternity. You must let go and move on." She growled. The Yurei, Asako, was gone, charged at us. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the long slip of paper, the Ofuda, with the name of Takami Sasuno. I took the slip of paper and placed it on the Yurei's forehead. Instantly, the Ofuda went to work. The Yurei was engulfed in a firestorm. It let out an ear-splitting scream as the fire consumed and vanquished it to hell. Silence fell upon the apartment. I turned to Izumi, who was on her knees, her head in her hands. I held her in my arms as she sobbed. The incidents that took place in Tokyo caused residual effects. There were many witnesses involved during the night of the Hyakyagyo. This forced L.I.O.S to dispatch their memory-altering unit. The MAU went to work immediately, identifying the majority of the witnesses and altering their memories of that night. Since all electronic devices, including hotel cameras, were possessed by One, none of what happened there was recorded. Of course, as is the case during an incident of this size, not all witnesses were found. However, finding that they were but a small percentage who believed they saw objects coming to life. And how ridiculous that sounds, these witnesses will not speak about that night, and if they do, the MAU will pay them a visit within hours. While this part of the investigation was cleaned and contained, not everything came out pristine. First, I was informed by our intelligencers that Izumi had tried to end her life a few weeks after the incidents that took place in Tokyo. Luckily, she was found by a neighbor and taken to the hospital where she was resuscitated. Then, she was placed into a behavioral health unit where she's supervised. Onmyoji Semai has been postponed indefinitely. Whether Izumi will be able to defeat her inner demons, only time will tell. Second, it would seem the gentleman unknown has once again orchestrated these events. To what extent his involvement is unknown. What is known is that the possibility of the gentleman unknown being aware of L.I.O.S is strong. Izumi mentioned she was being harassed by a critic named Shin-shi. This critic was never found. The Japanese word Shin-shi translates to gentleman. For this agent, this is a clear indication that the gentleman unknown is taunting L.I.O.S. Further investigation into this being will be required. Revenge and guilt are powerful forces with the capability to ruin lives before and after the grave. Revenge clouds the mind and prevents it from making rational decisions. It drives a person to administer justice in their own hands, usually in the form of violence against those who have caused the grievance. And it is not until after revenge is sought that the reality of what has been done is seen. Many books and movies use revenge as a device to propel a story forward. And while this may be an exciting thing to read or watch, the reality is much different. It is not exciting, it is tragic. Roger Bacon once said that revenge is a wild justice that puts the law out of office. He's right. If revenge was sought by all, then there would be no need for law. And if this was the case, then humanity, like David Hume believed, would eventually wipe itself out of existence. In the end, revenge is a demon that preys on the vulnerable. It took Edmond Dantes 1,200 pages to realize that revenge was not worth the time. Hamlet and Othello would have benefited from not seeking it out. And Osako Tamasaki would have been able to cross over and rest in peace had she been privy to this knowledge. But just as revenge drives a person to madness, guilt can do just as much damage. Izumi Takahashi suffered from a severe case of guilt. What she did to Asako is an unforgivable act. However, it is an act that should not be used against her. If placed in her situation, what would another person do? Perhaps they would have found a way to escape to Kuchisake Onna with Asako safe, or perhaps they both would have died. While it is easy to pass judgment on Izumi's cowardly actions, the truth is that one should not judge until they themselves have gone through the same situation. Oftentimes, people say they never allow their best friends or significant others to come to harm. But it's one thing to say something and another to actually do it. Life is a complicated thing filled with many obstacles. Some are small, some are large, but all have repercussions. A person must do their best to move forward and do right by themselves and by others. This is not an easy thing to do. Overcoming these obstacles can cause people to hurt others in the process. Everyone, this agent included, is guilty of this. What must be done once guilt is experienced is apologize to those who have been hurt and forgive the self. If not, then a person is doomed to live in a hell of their own creation.